Good afternoon and welcome to the April Austin Software Cooperatives meetup group. We are reviewing radical companies without bosses or employees. This is a third part in a three-part series. We're going to try to get through the last part of the book. We do have some of part two to review, and I think it's quite important. We're going to stop every now and then to catch up with people and see what they think in each part. We're going to be using mind map to do the review so people can participate in the review. And so when we left off the last time, we got to a really critical portion of the book. And it was a part about what they call radical distributions. And I'm just going to review that really quick here. We'll start over here. The Rosedale distribution. So they're calling it the Rosedale distribution is a name for a practice, and this is from someone named Rosedale that he first heard. This is not the author. Oh, actually, it is the author saying this. That they first heard from entrepreneur Philip Rosedale, founder of Linden Labs, High Fidelity, several other companies in between. Came up with the scheme in 2005, and here it is. So, as a company grows, a small amount of cash and shares are put out for distribution every month. Every member gets, for instance, $1,000, an equal portion of the wealth the company generated. People don't get to keep these goodies for themselves. They get to distribute them to other members. That's important. They give it to anybody they feel has contributed the most during the month. Each person knows best who has contributed. Each person decides how much to give to whom based on whatever criteria feels right at that time. Each member gets to have a direct impact on company ownership. So this is a Rosedale distribution, and they base their distribution scheme on this way of reinvesting or distributing the profits from the company. And I'm saying that this is an important part of the book. I want to say that this is probably the most important part because it's the hardest problem to solve, and it's a problem that causes a lot of the issues with startups or even businesses that are mature but try to change over to some type of ownership or employee ownership model. They run into problems here. Let's get into their distribution. We can get some feedback in. All right. So the radical distribution is based on the Rosedale distribution. In most cases, everyone has a direct hand in doing something that is usually reserved for owners, wealth and ownership distribution. And they get in the habit of doing so. And like the Rosedale distribution, the process is scalable. 10,000 people can distribute wealth and ownership the same way that a handful of people can. So what they do is they distribute it in something called a RAD. And this solves certain types of problems. One of them is when there isn't anything to distribute yet. So it's kind of like an equity distribution. So RADs are not currency. RADs are issued before there's revenue because contributions happen regardless of revenue. The giving criteria is completely up to each person, although they can agree to some explicit guiding criteria to start with. In any case, the distribution retrospectives, new criteria are fleshed out harvested and an optimal guideline. So they do retrospectives after each distribution. RADs represent dynamic ownership. 1 month you may give me all your RADs, but the next month you may not give any. The absolute number of RADs allocated to me either stays the same or goes up at every distribution. Your percentage of the total could go up, stay the same, or go down every distribution. To calculate your percentage ownership, divide the number of RADs you have been allocated by the total number of allocated RADs. When money or time or whatever else is dispersed later, it is done as a function of the number of RADs each person owns. If you have accumulated 200 RADs and I have 100, then you get twice as much as me in whatever's being factored. Right? So I'm thinking when it says when money or time, this would be like maybe even they're thinking of like vacation or something. Let's go over here. This is my note here. This is kind of like cumulative voting and game theory. Okay, so I think this is kind of important. So if anybody has any comments on this, do you think this is a fair distribution? Have you ever heard of anything like this before?
So in one of your comments, it's stated as the ownership is dynamic, but the ownership is the same. It's just the distribution itself what changes, right?
Well, in the author's opinion, it is like right here. This is from the book. They think that the ownership is dynamic. So for instance, and they talk about this later in the book, if you're doing a distribution this way, and let's say you're splitting between, you have your regular salary. So let's say you're getting paid $8,000 a month or something. And then you have this RAD distribution. And then at some point they say, okay, we're going to push out the profits, like 25% of the profits, whatever. It's going to be based off the RAD distribution. Doesn't matter. That could happen in the future or not or whatever. But the points are put out every month. Now, as far as decision-making, then that part, it's one person, one vote, as far as I understand. As far as ownership, as far as cash and other things, especially, and he's going to say this later, but projects that you were on specifically, you can put up, instead of, someone can distribute their RADs to an actual project, they call it banner and these other things, and your association with that, then it's going to be proportionate to that. But yeah.
So the company, organization, ownership as who owns it and therefore has the power ultimately to decide, you're saying it's like one person, one vote, or one person, one share? I mean, something like that doesn't change. It's almost like a currency, some sort of like,
yeah,
you know, that goes after that.
As far as I can see, yeah. Yeah, as far as I can see, yeah. So let's go. I really think, in my opinion, this and everything that's talking about this concept is the big takeaway for the book. I think it's the most valuable thing in the book and the most novel, because it solves a number of problems. One of them is, so you have, there's a number of problems that it tries to address. One of them is absentee owners. So people who have some type of equity stake in a traditional business or what have you, and you're going to do a distribution, the people who have an equity stake but aren't contributing, they have a problem, right? Then she's going to go through a couple of other ones, but it's it really addresses a bunch of really tough problems. Now, as far as tying it to the legality of the business, that part, I don't know how that works. I can see it working with like a trust-based business, like an employee, a trust-owned entity, and you write the rules into the trust, and so it's irrevocable that way. But in the traditional LLC or something, I can see it having some, I guess, legal limits. It'd be interesting to see a lawyer talk about it. Let's try to blast through here. Any other comments? All right. Let's see here. So they're conceding that there's probably many ways of doing this. It's completely decentralized. The author is really sold on trying to decentralize as much as possible, which is actually not. I find that in these types of books that are promoting co-management, co-ownership, and really, you can say directing of a business as well. You can really put it 3 levels. They really don't talk about decentralization that much. And I appreciate that. It's just a really hard problem to try to solve. They are saying that this way of doing the distribution of kind of the incentives, let's call it, instead of calling it the ownership, you can call it the incentives. It may be the ownership actually, again, because when the business gets sold, if you sell the business, it's still, I believe that might be the point where it may not be one person, one vote. I guess you can decide that within the business, or decide that you can try to make it legally binding to where it's based off of the RADs or not based off the RADs to sell the business or not. But yeah, somebody could be, if someone is basically, everyone is just allocating, they're just the overachiever and they're just allocating all of their RADs to this person, and everyone else is kind of, kind of conceding that that person is really doing the heavy lifting, or one project is doing the heavy lifting, whatever. But then everyone comes together and says, okay, let's sell, right? Now you can you may think if it's, the majority wants to sell, they want to sell, right? Now you can kind of see some issues where there ethically, the business was originally created by, let's say, some founders, and it was, let's just say it's a media company, a newspaper. Let's say it's the New York Times, and some large medical company wants to buy the newspaper. Then you've got an issue, because you could have set up the newspaper to do fair and unbiased news or something like that, but then now you're selling it to an interest that's going to promote whatever it is, buying the drugs or whatever it is. So that would be the situation where you would want to say something like a benefits company, B company, that type of thing, where you're setting up for a reason other than profit. People set up businesses to where, even though it's an LLC or some other entity, they want it to go down a certain direction. The founders do that. But then if everyone has the ability to sell because they get offered an offer they can't refuse, right? Then they could go ahead and do that, even though the heavy lifting, they're conceding that the heavy lifting is done by another group. So that might be an issue. But I think you can set it up however you want. radical distributions let each co-owner allocate RADs as they see fit. Equality is not the goal. The resulting allocations will most likely not be equal, but they'll be equitable, according to what each co-owner recognizes as a contribution, how valuable that contribution is. Every co-owner has a different view of what's equitable and what is equitable, and will be able to express it in tangible ways through RAD. They will be able to express it in tangible ways through RAD allocations. Let's see here. So I found this part to be important if you implement this. So the retrospectives, basically they put in an initial rule that says, okay, if these distributions are happening and you want to know what someone's criteria was, they have to tell you. So you have a retrospective and someone requests, hey, I didn't really get any distribution of RAD this month. How did you all, what was your criteria? And someone can just say, hey, because I just like the way this person looked. Okay, but you're going to have to say that. And it's going to be, that's the transparency portion of this. And, other people may say, okay, well, this person allocates, but that's their judgment. So they may be a good contributor, performer, what have you, but their judgment on distribution, I may just not distribute things to them just because their judgment's not so great. But yeah, so being transparent there, that kind of thing, I think that is a great equalizer. Then they have the concept of banners. So someone can erect a banner and say, okay, this is for this cause. So it could be some type of, food drive, some type of whatever it is, or it could be a project. And you say, okay, this thing here, I'm going to contribute that. It's something that I'm going to see through, or at the end, at this point in time, it's going to be donated here. Whoever wants to do their distributions to that, they can do that. So that's a way of handling, instead of making it go to one person, you can also do it to causes. The transparency we talk about. Any questions on that? All right, we'll go through here. So this co-ownership and co-management, go ahead.
If I may. So because I'm trying to think, what about this is different than it, it sounds to me that this could be implemented in any other company, in the sense of in your performance evaluations, not having it be up to like a single manager, or having it be more horizontal, and having other groups, cross-evaluate or have some say, right? Then I think it's a little muddied here because there's the equity thing, but ultimately you're trying to assess performance, right? And how many brownie points you're getting, which, it happens to some level already. It's just like others can, I guess, vote. Because right now, in my mind, it's like, well, and there's many ways to do this, obviously, but I've seen that, there being some sort of person that is actually doing, let's call it interviews, or is gathering feedback points across the organization and your interactions or impact. And they're kind of keeping track of that. And then there's an effort to kind of normalize that across the company and yada, yada, right? So in my mind, it's like, well, that, right? So what about this is different than some other, more hipster way of going about performance evaluations?
All right. So I think what you're saying is, it sounded like you're saying that there's like a traditional way of going about doing performance evaluations, and it sounded like you kind of did a critique of it, where you're saying that usually, I guess, across teams, you're saying someone can go and do an interview of one team and then go and do an interview of another team. Is that what you're doing? Saying that, like one person could be assigned that or
Yeah,
does
what I'm
that?
saying is that there's a million ways to go about this, but the idea I'm trying to, abstract what's the idea that is different from this, and or the angle that I think is at play here, and it's the fact that people can be evaluated, or your performance ultimately about your contributions is assessed not in a traditional, I would say, like more narrow and hierarchical, in that sense of, oh, you have like one person you report to, and that person gives you some sort of like number, you know? So there's
Yeah.
another way, which,
Mhm.
I mean, there's a million ways, right? But today, right? And I'm saying that the fact that there's actually way more inputs all across, even from your peers, right? That's
Mhm.
thing already, right? In my mind, some companies are a little bit more like that, right? Or horizontal. That's why in my mind, I always want to ask, what about this is different from just like a more horizontal and multi-input way of going about performance evaluation?
Yeah, I'm still waiting. Like you're saying, there's stuff that's more horizontal. So I'm trying to get how is the horizontal input different, or what other way are you seeing it? So the way that this happens, it isn't really, hey, we're all going to, but they said they're going to say, okay, generally speaking, here's some criteria we're going to start out with, and we're going to distribute these points, and you can't give the points to yourself. You're going to have to distribute them. And every month we're going to do that. Now, you could have multiple teams. Someone doesn't know what this other team does, they're not giving any points to them. They don't care. They could give it all to their own team. They could give it to one person. They could split it across, right? The only requirement in this way is that they have to say what their criteria was. And he's saying that naturally people will give to causes that they believe were valuable. And so if on one team, it could be, you all know each other. And so it's like, okay, this person over here, I value these things. I'm going to give them the points. I'll give them all the points, whatever. Now, let's say it's multiple teams. Well, we have our team that, but team, let's say at a consultancy, it's a software consultancy, and you have the software and the programmers making the software and all that, and then you have the professional services branch. And you normally every quarter you close on maybe $2 million worth of deals every quarter, and the professional services implement. So you have the programmers that creating the project, and then the professional services they're customizing it to each customer as it comes through, and they close those deals. Now this next quarter, someone closes, a customer says, we want this way. We like your software, but we want to implement it this way. And the professional service had to do backflips. It wasn't made to do that, but they did a bunch of things to customize it, whatever. And the deal ended up being a $20 million deal. Well, people could be like, hey, I think they probably earned those points. I'm not on that team, but everybody's going to hear about that deal. And they're like, hey, this day we're going to go over there. But it could be the whole professional services tier. They could say, oh, yeah, everyone's working on on the back end, on the developer side, they're all working on a specific feature that everyone, is familiar with. The competitor has this feature. We need to go ahead and implement it, or we're toast. And it's something that could take 4 or 5 years, whatever. They have that breakthrough. They're going to go ahead and say, well, we've been wanting to sell that all this time. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and allocate to that Rockstar program, or whoever it is, right? So that's where I could see it can go to different teams that you hear of, and then it could go within your own team. That kind of thing. So what normally in that situation, that is top down from the CEO, and they actually they kind of have a bias towards the sales. So anyone that's closing per quarter, they're like that group or whatever, they're getting these, they're going to have this, they're going to have a group where everybody all goes to some type of party for the day. They have this celebration. They have all these other things. And at the end of the year, they have, better bonuses and all that stuff. There's a bias from the top. But this one is a bias from the rank and file. It also makes it to where during these times where there's the retrospectives, you're going to have to speak up about what you're working on. Right?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's so the general concept is not necessarily new. It definitely happens in corporate, but I think it's great to see how to what extent and in what ways it can flourish, and what are the typical, I don't know, ways in which co-owners assess and where is the value and how that changes. I think that obviously
what points, I have not heard of, like you're saying this happens, I have not heard of a point system in corporate where they do this.
No, and again, I want to abstract it. It's not like the a company credit score or something like that. But I've been part of companies in which they do. Again, it's obviously not as detailed and thought through, but there's definitely some sort of like push or evolution to where no, we want to have performance be assessed not only top down and by your first primary reviewer or second, but also by your peers and in your sphere of influence.
Yeah, that's absolutely definitely been around. 360 to 360, all that. The difference of this is the points. That's really it, and they accumulate.
Yes, for sure. And it traditionally in this model, again abstracted a little bit, it will be until year end, in which somebody's in charge to kind of quote unquote count all those points, which it will be more like the feedback like points, right? There's not like a specific point score, but there's definitely points assigned from each of the feedback.
The points are locked in. The points are locked in. There's nobody top down that can say, at this point in time, now we're going to do distribution. Nope. Everybody says, well, we're going to distribution, and it has to be by the point allocation.
Yes. No. This is like a different level. That's why I'm excited about it. It's move on. Yeah.
So and I think they go through the first couple of chapters. They go through there's co-ownership and co-management, and it's an issue. They struggle with how do you implement this, and the co-ownership and co-management, you get this feedback mechanism is irrevocable. And that's where I'm saying, like somebody's saying, hey, you get these credits, everybody, you have a bunch of write-ups. This is saying, actually, it's just BS. Unless it's irrevocable, and when somebody says we have to do distribution, no one can come in, take away your points. No one can come in and say we're going to do distribution, but not to you. No one can come in and do that. And so there are things where there's other creative things in the next part where they talk about loans, all types of other things that you can do against your points, and all these other things to try to, say my future value for whatever points I'm getting, that kind of thing. You can do all that. There's flexibility. But it really locks in to where you're really not going to be able to be kind of an absentee idea person that comes in and then leaves. It just doesn't lend itself well to that. It pretty much harshly punishes that. And it harshly punishment. I mean, they're hostile to top down everything, and I'm cool with that. So it's set to, it's really to be against that. Let's see. Another thing with this system is they're trying to reinforce that a lot of what should be rewarded is intangible. So I gave an example of where you can easily see a quarterly sale. But there are people who just the glue between a bunch of different tasks and they glue them together. It's hard to see that, or it's hard to measure that, let's say. But people can see it, and they can naturally reward it. That kind of thing. And people can be, it's interesting because people can have pushback on this. They can say, well, what if somebody they do a bunch of work, they do a lot of valuable things, but what if the system's not fair to them? Because they kind of they're underappreciated and they go under the radar, and so it's unfair to them. And my pushback on that is just because it's top down doesn't mean that same person is not going to go under the radar. I would say when it's a top down reward system, I'd call a gray hair system. It's just, the person that's most senior is the one that wisely knows who to allocate to. I'd say that those people are more harshly punished. The premise here is that the people closest to the work being done, they're going to know and be able to allocate better. That's the premise here. Let's see here. I'm going to start. I want to say that was one of the most important chapters of this part. They have this concept for review, this thing of fiat hierarchy, where basically fiat is by decree, and it's saying old school businesses are fiat. They're by decree, top down. The boss says, here's the way it is. And they're saying fiat hierarchy makes it impossible to co-manage or co-own a business. With a fiat hierarchy in place, co-management is at best temporary and at worst lip service. And now here they have a harsh critique of Agile. The current state of Agile is a canonical example of this. The original idea was to have software developed by a complete self-managed team. But even with the best intentions, it is impossible to sustain a self-managed team with a fiat hierarchy. The daily stand-up meeting turns into a reporting meeting, not because the boss is a bad person, but because his job is to report up the hierarchy to his boss. It doesn't matter that the Agile team discovered a major obstacle. You can take it out of the scope because sales promised that feature already. And who's going to tell the CEO? Delivering value to our customers plays second fiddle to face saving up and down the chain of command. There are a few pockets of co-managed Agile teams here and there, but they're very fragile. Mostly they revolve around an enlightened boss who is clever enough to hide it and protect it. Once the enlightened boss is out of the picture, that's the end of the experiment, regardless of the results. That's because the fiat hierarchy values perception and control above all else. So that's that critique of Agile. But any comments on that? Is that you all think that that's fair or unfair? All right. Co-ownership too is blocked by fiat hierarchy. Cooperatives are a good example. So they have some harsh things to say about cooperatives. And one of the reasons is you can any democratic process can be co-opted, right? We did a review on a book called Inverted Totalitarianism by Sheldon Wolin. The book is about exploiting republics, exploiting the electoral process, exploiting democracy, essentially. and how to turn it into a system that's even more exploitative than a traditional, say, fascist system, totalitarian system, whatever, because it looks legitimate, but it's not. Now, they have a critique here with Mondragon, where there was a problem with Mondragon, where they did a vote at one point in time. There's many systems. They're saying Mondragon, but it's a cooperative of cooperatives. There was a company within Mondragon, a profitable company. I want to say they were making washing machines or something, and I forget what it is that they were making, but that company started to go under. Now they decided to sell, and when they decided to sell, when they sold, they basically elected a CEO for that portion and all that. That person went and sold all the employees. Basically, their retirement and all that was not reimbursed. It was basically thrown out. And so they didn't get a chance to vote on that. They didn't see that. But that's what happens when it's basically, you can have a banana republic inside of a very thinly veiled banana republic, that it's a veneer of democracy. And that happened in Mondragon. So it's one of the examples of where they fell short. And that is where, we did the review of Richard Wolff, where you don't have three levels. There's ownership, management, and directing. You can have ownership, get exploited. You can have management, co-management, get exploited if your management doesn't include directing. So Wolff teases that out. Directing means the strategy. So someone says, oh, we have to sell. Oh, the employees aren't also versed in mergers and acquisitions. They don't have to be all the way, but hey, oh, we need to see what's going to happen with the retirement. Oh, we're all losing that? Well, then we don't like that deal. That would stop that. So and they're very big on saying just because you're a cooperative, it doesn't mean that those problems are handled. You have to have everybody have some type of insight to the directing of the company, and so what they call management, and they roll it back all into management.
And this is assuming that everybody has one vote, right? But it's not the case, right? There's tiers, right, in ownership.
No, in this system, it's one person, one vote.
In Mondragon, I mean?
No, in Mondragon, it's really a cooperative of cooperatives, right? And so you can vote way over. Basically, you elect. It's a republic. You elect your CEO, all of that stuff. So it's just like a traditional business, as far as there's a CEO, president, and all that, but they elect. But everyone gets to vote, but they elect that. And so you have all of the same problems that you would have with electoral politics. Someone could be elected that doesn't really represent your views, all of that stuff. You end up having to have voting blocks, and all of that goes on. Now, remember, they got like 200,000 employees, right? And so within each one of they tried to deal with that by having the separate businesses. It's kind of similar to like GE, how they have business units, and those business units are basically almost like Fortune 500 businesses by themselves. And so each leader is essentially a CEO. It's more like that, except for the cooperative itself, Mondragon, it has some tying functions, like they have a bank, they have a bunch of others, they have a university, they have a bunch of things that act as glue between all of them. But that doesn't stop one entity from failing. now, another thing they do is, a bunch of people get laid off and a business goes under. Those people kind of have the first stab at jobs in the other cooperatives. So basically, that one company that went under, all of them got hired in the other cooperative entities. But yeah, these things, I chalk it up as like they're you can exploit democracies. Democracy doesn't mean it's just good. It's the best. It's going to be successful, or that it's going to be fair. It doesn't determine fairness. It can still be exploited, and that happened there.
So everybody's one vote. Everybody's one vote. Then they elected that, let's say, system of governance, right? It's almost like like a mini republic. If that's what everybody with the same level of power decided.
Yeah, it's a republic. I mean, look, if we go back to the participatory democracy book, the Carol Pateman, there is, in democracies, empirically, one of the things in empirical political science, democracies the members in a democracy are apathetic. They want to do as little as possible. You have to do something different to get people to participate. It's traditional republics where somebody votes for a leader, for president, whatever. They want to vote, and then they don't want to do anything else, participate until the next time for the vote. And the contemporary political science view is that that's actually for the best. I don't agree with that. Most people come from outside. They're like, what? I don't like that. You have to go to a more classical view to get participatory democracy. Most people think of democracy, they think of some kind of, I want to be able to participate at whatever point I want. It's like the radical distribution, I want to say, promotes participatory democracy, and they're putting that forth as an argument against, let's say, a republic. They're just saying, if you have a cooperative, if you do it in a republic style and you get big enough, you're going to have issues. You need to have some type of incentive system that it reinforces participating. And their radical distribution is doing that.
Yeah, but the whole, as you say, right, participation, the engagement, and also, as I was saying, is like, to me, one of the pillars is that, well, bottom line, also everybody has, equivalent power, right? It's like one vote. And we know that liberal democracies, there's like the economic power and the democratic political power. So now I'm trying to use your analogy and say, well, I guess the democratic power is already there, but still, what's, as you say, well, but if there's no engagement, that might not be enough. And I wonder if there's another point in the liberal democracies, which is like that, like economic power, which happens when people accumulate, right? And that all of a sudden, even if you politically have the same power, bottom line, you don't, right? And I wonder how that affects that other angle. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
I'd say contemporary political science says you don't. A republic is very much, if you look at the one, I'm forgetting, that came out of Yale, the one study where you take people's preferences in the United States and then policy, most people's preferences do not match policy. So electoral politics in the United States does not match what you prefer, what most people prefer. And that is predictable empirically by electoral republic style democracy. And so, honestly, I mean, again, back from the participatory democracy book, The contemporaries are like, that's the way you want it. And so a lot of times it's basically an elitist view. It's saying, oh, you kind of really don't know how to, I always like to say nukes. You don't want people voting on how to make the nukes. So no, right? That kind of thing. And you got to go ahead, smart person on top, but now you just get to vote for who the smart person is. Well, what happens when there's misaligned incentives where they say, hey, I want to do the sale, and maybe it's corruption. They got handed some cash on the side to do the sale. Maybe they're just, incompetent. And they say, I'm going to do the sale. We're not handling how the retirement is being done, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars. And oh well, whatever, it doesn't bother me, right? That it's a nasty problem. So if you don't have people engaged, if you don't incentivize engagement, which I think is a hard problem to solve, then you're gonna run into problems. You get mandatory engagement. Imagine mandatory voting. This is mandatory. You have to distribute your points every month. That's controversial, right? Imagine if you had to vote in the United States. Like, well, what happens? Am I going to go to jail if I don't vote? What happens? You get some punishment or whatever. So yeah. I think just that distribution portion, that's easy enough to implement and easy enough for someone to participate in, and not just so draconian a punishment type thing, that I can see that being mandatory. And if someone doesn't do it, then maybe they lose the equivalent of whatever the RADs are or whatever. So yeah. So it goes, they do a critique for the fiat. They really promote decentralization. It's open book management, I think, might be a really good book to review. It's interesting. We may not get to the part 3. We already know, basically they're doing a critique of traditional capital allocation and saying markets will solve everything. But, as we've seen, the wealth transfer, it's not really working. And they say that throughout the book. Symbolic ownership. I want to say that they go through Mondragon. I brought that up. That's what happened. It's really, you have ownership, but you have kind of a reinforced apathy that's predicted from contemporary political science on democracy. And you need to have some type of counter incentive system to that, to promote participation. And I'm just going to say punish apathy, because really that's what happens. And I mean, they're really big on talking about the co-owners have equity in the company and participate in financial and strategy decisions. Anything short of that is not co-ownership. Co-management means that you and your co-workers are responsible for creating a company that works for you. There's no package solution. They're pretty big on saying, this is what we do. This is our framework. You are going to have to adjust it. I would say that I really, kind of seems trivially true. I think because each domain So a services business is way different than a product business. That alone is going to be, I think, really important. Services, things not so patentable, that type of thing, whatever. You got products, you got things that are patentable, you got people that come in, you have to solve problems of how do you compensate things that would be traditionally considered more like a capital asset or something that increases production and where someone could invent it, and then what's your relationship with that as a business? But I think it's basically, I would say, you go back to the David Ellerman books, which I think a lot of what's in here is reiterated in the David Ellerman worker-owned business books that we reviewed. Basically, the fundamental problem is you have labor and you have capital. Capital meaning cash in the beginning of the business, so they're operating, right? Or tools. So you need a truck, all that. That's capital too. The fundamental idea is you have the labor working and the capital, which is the employer, right? Element calls it the firm. They, by default, have the rights to all of the outputs. The outputs could be negative, so you go into debt, whatever, but the outputs could be positive, and they have the rights to all of it. Labor has nothing. And he's saying, okay, fine, but that's not necessary. There's nothing that stops labor from, instead of capital renting labor, labor can rent capital, just like how you can rent a car, rent a truck. Whatever you can rent, which is basically take a loan from a bank, right? And so you reverse the relationship. So it's basically, instead of an employer-employee relationship, there is a worker-owned business that pays people, so through a loan, pays capital for the use of the actual cash or other tools, that type of things, and even patents for inventions, they get a rent, that kind of thing. This book, I want to say one of my favorite things about it is it really succinctly describes that with this, like the RAD concept. It says, and it clearly delineates that, hey, you're not a radical company in their definition of radical company, kind of a prescriptive and descriptive kind of play. So there's on one side, they're saying you ought to do this in order to be a non-hierarchical business and all that. And then they're also describing, it's like, well, if you want to say you're a radical company, this is what it means. You can't be a radical company and have radical distributions and all that if you have capital owning business decisions. You can't have that. But you can invite them in through this participating. They say in here, someone wants to invest $1 million into the business. That is basic. That's just going to end up being a loan. But the people can actually, for that entity, whether it be a business, an individual, VC, whatever, they can be distributed RADs. So normally, you're just getting your pay as a regular loan, and we're giving you, whatever you do on a loan, 10%, whatever. Or a combination, right? They can say, well, this person, not only, like VCs do, they give good advice. That's a big part of what they do. It's like, hey, go over here and partner with them, all that. That individual on the meetings, retrospective meetings or whatever, that individual, they get RADs as well. You can allocate to them. And they are not a 40-hour-a-week person at all. There isn't a limit there as far as the 40-hour-a-week. That's another hard problem to solve. Is if someone's not participating, what do? They're not doing the hours in the week. How are you allocating the money, whatever? you can have this problem of the absentee owner. Well, if they're not, the people don't feel that they get the distribution as the allocations come every month, they're going to have less and less of the what they're calling ownership, this percentage of RAD. So I guess you can call it an inflation. There's an inflation happening every month with RADs. There's more produced every month. It's a set amount. So if you're not swimming, you're sinking. All right, 804. Let's go through. Let's try to get through some of this. Any questions so far? All right. They like Eleanor Ostrom. We reviewed one of their books. So they basically are saying we implement this as well. Basically, again, anybody talking about some type of organic bottom-up system, that the rules of the system, the rules for the distribution, the rules for what she calls graduated sanctions and all that are developed by the individuals in order to solve the problem of trying to not have, it can be public, it can be private. So you could have government, you could have a CEO, but both of them are hierarchical. Eleanor Ostrom is against that. She's saying, okay, well, not just against it, but there's a third way. It's bottom-up decision-making. Well, how do you do that when you have something on the line, what she calls a common pool resource, something that has to be distributed? It's a rival good. Okay, you want to think like money, okay? What do you do that? She has a set of rules, right? So here are those rules here. Boundaries of users and resources are clear. This is their implementation of the rules. Okay, no, this is her rules. Boundaries of users and resources are clear. Congruence between benefits and costs. Users have procedures for making their own rules. Regular monitoring of users and resource condition. Graduated sanctions, this one's real important. Conflict resolution mechanisms. Minimal recognition of rights by government. And nested enterprises. So I can see these kind of maybe a bit abstract here. They went ahead and implemented them for what they're saying is a radical framework. Clearly defined boundaries is pretty much the same. Balanced contributions and benefits. This kind of gets handled with that radical distribution. Inclusive decision-making. Monitoring, graduated sanctions, conflict management, right to co-manage, and polycentric governance. So different types of governance for different teams. That's where this nested enterprises is. Kind of, if you don't dig into her, you kind of don't get as much from here, but they're saying we kind of address that. They have a little tool. I'm going to try to get to that, and then we can kind of finish off. They have a little tool for trying to grade yourself. And we're going to get to that. So here you have the boundaries of who can be a member or who's not a member. The part where I said investors, that's a hard problem to solve. So how do you bring someone in who isn't a 9-to-5er and have them be a part of the team? Can you be a part of the team? Traditional cooperative law, it's a hard no. Somebody who's not working, they don't get a vote. They have a way to include them. And it's with these RADs type. If someone's getting RADs, they're part of the team. That's how they define it. So they start out here, clear definition of what determines who can be a member of the team or company, who has rights to extract wealth from the company, and a company's constitutional framework that specifies what it's about. I told you what theirs is, basically. So they're saying if you don't do that, clear boundaries, you're going to have serious issues. Each team is responsible for accepting, rejecting individual members. So multiple teams in the business. Each team, they can decide, oh, this person wants to invest in the team or whatever. We have clear boundaries defined where we can say they're part of the team. So it's not they're saying not at the business level. Each one of these is relative to what Eleanor Ostrom has. Anybody affected by, this is basically the self-determined rule of self-determination. Anyone affected by this decision must participate in the process of making that decision. That must is controversial. Anybody impacted by a decision must participate in that decision in some way, shape, or form. Those are two controversial things. But again, consequences of that is apathy, and you go straight on to what happened to Mondragon. It's not doing that. Yeah, so monitoring, graduated sanctions, this one's kind of foggy. So graduated sanctions means you don't just execute someone immediately for doing something wrong. It needs to be, the system needs to be, oh, there was a mistake made. Maybe it's just like calling someone out, and then it gets worse and worse, more and more powerful. Go through here. This will be the last thing. This, I think, was useful. So having all of these, because it's kind of hard to think about the Ostrom model, having all of these and grading yourself on how close you get to, you know, a 5-point, I think it's actually pretty good, right? And, you know, monitoring, they're saying, you know, well, we didn't do that well there. All right, so we finished this part. And I think the part where the radical distribution, that part, I think is probably the most important part. But the whole next part is about how I do the distributions and all that stuff like that. Or if you want to create a new company, they're kind of doing a mock run, do that. So any questions, comments?